colleagues who gave such nice thank yous at the start of their presentations. So I'm going to start with thanks, because I'll probably forget at the end. So thank you very much to Anita, who's been my coach through this personal development process and has got me this far. But I also want to say thank you to Donald for starting this form of personal development, and to Bahar and the others in the TDU team who have encouraged us and have seen this whole fruit of this workshop festival that you've been part of. Thanks also to Esin and Murat, who are also with us today, and well, that's just what they've been doing, isn't it? They've been helping us so much with our technical questions, and they've basically made this online semester possible for us. So thank you very much, Esin and Murat and Esin's whole team. And I want to thank you, my colleagues. You've come to listen today. You've made this workshop festival possible. And just generally, when I describe to others my workplace, then I tell them that it's a place where there's a high professional standard, where I look around and see my colleagues doing their best, and that really inspires me to try and do my best and to think about my teaching and improve my teaching. So really credit to all of you, and thank you. So that's the thank yous, and here is the topic of my presentation today on the screen: reflective practice, widening the horizons of learning, which is a big claim, isn't it? So we're going to look at that. What is reflective practice? Is it really possible to widen the horizons of learning? And I will also share how I try to encourage my students to do some reflective practice. And we're going to do all that in 17 minutes. So first of all, here's the definition of reflective practice. I will read this from the screen. Reflective practice is the capacity to reflect on action so as to engage in a process of continuous learning, according to Schur. Okay, and I highlighted some parts of that: to engage and continuous learning. And I highlighted those parts because I think in my teaching, wow, if I can engage my students, that's very important. And if we can learn continuously, if my students can learn continuously, that would be a wonderful thing too. So this makes me think, okay, reflective practice sounds like a good thing if we can encourage students to engage and to learn continuously. But what do you think? Here's a poll here, which a lot of you, or some of you, have started to fill in, but maybe a few more of you could give your responses. So this idea of encouraging students to reflect on what they've learned and what they will learn, what percentage of our teaching time should be given to this? Maybe none, because maybe it happens anyway. Maybe it's automatic. Maybe a little bit. Maybe quite a bit regularly. 10 or 20%, maybe even more than 20%. What do you think? Oh, I need to show you the responses. So thank you very much for sharing your ideas about that. And most of you think some reflection should happen as part of our teaching, and we should encourage our students to reflect upon their learning. And most of you think that should be 10% of our total teaching time. Some of you think even more than that, 10 minutes every class, or 20 minutes in a double class. Okay, thank you for sharing that. Let's have a look a bit more about, well, what can reflection be and when can it happen? Now, there are different places where we can encourage reflection, okay? We can do before learning reflection, which actually that poll that we just did was part of. But we can also reflect while we're learning, and we can reflect after we've learned, and even going forward in another context, we can still reflect. So this is good news for us. How we reflect is quite flexible, and if we're planning reflection within our classes, it could happen before, during, or after. But in theory, why is reflection important? Because I'm making this claim that it opens a realm of learning, it widens our horizons. Well, there is evidence in the literature, and researchers do identify two different ways of learning. At the bottom of the slide here, there is automatic learning by doing, defined as experience accumulation by Zono and Winter. So just by doing something repetitively, even without thinking about it, we learn. However, many theorists, including Zono and Winter, would argue that there's a whole nother level of learning which is consciously reflective. And Zono and Winter talk about deliberate cognitive processes. Okay. So we can imply then, if we don't engage in reflection, we are missing out on a whole realm of learning. There's a level of learning that we're not doing if we're not consciously reflecting, because we're down at this more sort of basic level of just repeating, but we're missing out on a level of learning. So many theorists would argue. Well, that sounds nice in theory, but is there any evidence in practice? And I found this very interesting study that I'd like to just share with you for a moment. This took place in a call center. So this is a place which offers customer service to people calling in by telephone. And it's a study conducted by Stefano et al. For Harvard Business School. Okay. So in this call center, which happened to be in India, there were two groups of call center trainees, and before they were put live in the call center, they did 4 weeks of training. But one group received the usual training and simply had practice time to repeat what they'd learned, more repetition. Okay. But look, then there was this other group that also received the same training, but instead of repetition, they had opportunity to reflect on their learning for 15 minutes at the end of 10 of those days of training. So they did 10 15-minute reflection sessions. And then Stefano et al., the researchers, looked at their performance when they were tested about their knowledge and also about the customer satisfaction rating. Well, look, this group that had been encouraged to reflect as just a small part of their training performed 23% better when they were tested on their knowledge, and they also received 20% more top customer satisfaction rating. So here is evidence from the business world that reflective practice, reflecting on what we've learned, has a real impact on results. Well, this challenged me because in my context here, or rather there, teaching at Izmir University of Economics, I was teaching on the undergraduate English program, and I was particularly thinking about this course, ENG 101, using the very good Anchor 1 book that's been developed by Anita and Neil with Ainur. And in this book, there are reflective activities actually at the end of each unit, but I had not been doing it. And I was challenged, okay, well, how can I encourage my students to reflect if reflection is so important? So at the end of each unit, I tried some different things with my 4 different classes. I'll just share with you what I did now. So one thing that I did, actually at the end of the last unit, was I used a blog. Okay. I introduced this blog in class, and I posted this reflective question, or 2 reflective questions, and I really encouraged my students to respond on the blog based on Blackboard. However, unfortunately, here at the end of the course, there was very limited participation, as you can see. For some sections, nobody replied. However, those that did reply, I think, because they wrote a few sentences, they had thought about what was rewarding on the course, what was difficult, and I got that feedback from the students, and the other students who bothered to check the blog could see what other students were saying. So there's feedback to both. And also with this, there is a possibility of an ongoing conversation. You can respond to students' reflections, and you can ask them further questions if you want. Well, what else did I do? At the end of another unit, actually the first unit, I used Mentimeter, which you might be familiar with, an online tool, a way of surveying students in your class using mobile devices. And this was better. I had reflections from about 50% of the class. We could see on the screen the restatement of key things that they'd learned and remembered from the class. And again, both I and the other students could receive this feedback about what students had remembered and what they had learned. Something else I tried at the end of the third unit was a more communicative, reflective activity in class. So I asked the student to talk with the student next to them about what they'd learned during the unit, and pick one of those things to explain more. And then I did a social activity in the class which required them to talk to a new student that they didn't usually sit next to, but they explained again what they'd learned to the new person. Now, we had very high participation because I made them do this. It was part of the class activity. And I could see that they were doing it because they had to get up and move around. I think because it was quite a quick activity, there was rather limited reflection on just one point of their learning. However, once again, as I was monitoring this, I could hear what the students had learned, and also, of course, they were communicating this to other students. So again, this feedback to the teacher and the students is an important, beneficial point that we gain from all of these reflective activities. The last one I want to describe, and I think it was really the most effective one, so I've left it till last. It was at the end of the second unit. Here I gave much more structure to the students and more time to the reflection. So there was some brainstorming together to bring ideas to mind. Then the students had to do some preparation individually. But then in small groups, with groups of 3 or 4 students in total, they had to present their learning point from that unit to the other students in the group. And I gave them quite a lot of structure about the language to use and how to describe their learning point, and instructed them to ask questions, 4 questions from the other students. Well, again, there was good participation. It was in class, back in the good old days when we could see our students face to face. So I could be really with them and check that they were doing it and encourage them. I think this led to deeper reflection because they had more time basically to prepare. And again, this valuable point of feedback was true again. So, what did I think, having trialed these different reflective activities in the fall semester? Well, generally, the use of technology can be beneficial. I could see that, for example, using Mentimeter was accessible to most of the students. Maybe it enabled students that didn't want to speak in front of others to post their thoughts more anonymously. And there was this instantaneous feedback that happened quickly that the whole class could see very visibly. But also the structured activity within the small group presentations, which combine social activity, leads to greater participation and really deeper reflection where the students had thought more about it and had thought more about what they had learned in order to explain it to somebody else. So this produced some further questions for me. I still think about those results from the Indian call centre, and I just wonder, would the use of reflective activities produce any measurable or noticeable difference in assessment results? I would like to check that. And to be honest, I had planned to do that in this semester, the spring semester, but I rather let that fall away with our changes in our teaching. And also, another question is discussion necessary for effective reflection? Because several of the key writers about reflective practice emphasize the need to talk about your reflection with somebody else. So these are questions I'd like to think about further. Here are my references. At this point, I would like to say that as part of this workshop festival, several other colleagues have been thinking about reflection and particularly how we reflect upon our own teaching. And there are some really interesting posters which are available in the SFL recordings section. So I'd just like to mention those now, as that relates to reflection as well. So Mary Jane and Murat, they've published a poster there using technology, the recordings, to reflect on their teaching. Selda and Idil have also published a poster there, and they particularly looked at some quite detailed reflective questions they used. And also Anil, Susan and Ebru have posted a poster there which describes a really good collaborative reflective journey that they did together on their teaching. So if you want to think more about reflection and people's experiences of reflection, have a look at those posters as part of this same workshop festival. Well, we're pretty much at the end here now, but let's finish, if you like, with an after-learning reflection. So, do you have an observation or question about this reflective practice? You can put that in the chat box now. I will also try to open the whiteboard so we can post on there if you like. Let's put that task there. So thank you very much for listening, and yes, please share any question or observation either on this whiteboard or in the chat box now. Thank you for your appreciation. Yes, so there's a key quote there from Dolores: without reflection we can't learn. This is basically John Dewey would agree with you. Yes, and I agree with Pamela. I think that we need to be reflective practitioners ourselves in order to help our students do it. We have to practice what we preach, basically. Yes, and this is a very good point from Funda, that reflection allows us really to see what's really going on, because we can kind of fool ourselves sometimes unless we take time to look back and think about what we've done. And Anita observes that reflection makes learning more permanent. I agree, this opening this idea of continuous learning, that it's not just learning that happened in that class and now it's finished, but opening up the idea that the learning can continue after that class, after that course is finished.